Okay. All right, so it's recording. Okay. So it is 6:01, and I'll call the meeting to order. And Linda, you have a pen. Would you like to
I do. I assumed.
Thank
At
you.
least for this one, I figured I would continue the tradition from last year.
Very good. All right. So next on the agenda is the election of vice chair. Anybody would like to nominate somebody for vice chair?
I really want to hear Linda's thoughts on this because she's the vice chair of at least one other subcommittee, but she also has experience here as well. So I really would like to hear, you know, where she is with this. So Linda, if you feel like you're like swamped with the other stuff, I can nominate myself, or I'm happy to do that. If you're like, no, man, I've been doing my time here in this subcommittee, I'm ready for vice chair, then I'm okay with that too.
I appreciate that. No, it's been something that I've been thinking about. If you feel comfortable nominating yourself, or I can nominate you, but I was a little bit uncertain about my level of time.
Okay. No,
to do that.
I understand you've been on this before, so I didn't want to just like come swooping in and, you know.
Nope, that's okay.
Okay.
So then I guess I nominate Member Haynes for vice chair.
Cool.
I'll second the nomination.
Okay.
All right. Hearing no nominations, we'll go to the vote. I'll just do this by roll call because there's only one. I was going to do it all typing in at the same time in the chat, but we'll just do it by roll call vote. Unless anybody...
That seems reasonable.
Okay. Linda?
I vote for Member Haynes.
Jeff?
I will also vote for this character, Jeff.
And I will also vote for Member Haynes. So congratulations.
Thanks.
Jeff, you've been elected vice chair of the Facilities and Security Subcommittee with all
Dream
the
is reality.
responsibilities and just great accolades that come with that.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. So then next comes approval of the minutes of the meeting of June 15th, 2020. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, so move.
I'll second it.
Yeah, I have to abstain on this one because I wasn't there basically.
I did give him a quick run through. I didn't see anything that I could think of that was incorrect or missing.
Agreed.
Okay. So roll call vote. Linda?
Yeah, yes.
Jeff?
Abstain.
And I'll vote yes. So the motion passes. All right. So next on the agenda is the current facility status after closure and in preparation for reopening. Nobody minds. I'm actually look to switch the order of number 4 and 5 and discuss basically the number 5 first, just the facility and infrastructure requirements. Given the plan that we were given at a little before 4:30 today. Anybody have an issue with that? Okay. So, Daryl, would you like to talk? I mean, I don't know if everybody got to review the plan that you sent out.
Yep.
But if you could just give us I guess 1 minute summary of the plan, and then kind of talk about, from our viewpoint, what we're looking at, and also to guide the discussion tonight. Within the subcommittee, I don't necessarily want to talk about the plan itself. Let's leave that for the general meeting at 7. But let's just discuss any basically safety, security, and facility impacts of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So thank you, Adam. When we were, we've been talking about this kind of rollout for a few weeks now internally. And, just to kind of go through this quickly, but with a little detail, the number of COVID cases is going up. The percentage of cases are on the rise. It's now up to 2.2%, I believe. That was the last number that I saw. If it goes up again today, I think that's going to, eventually push the governor into looking at basically rescinding some of his movement in terms of the phasing in model. So as we looked at our own facilities, at our own constraints in all of our buildings, our high school, our elementary schools, middle schools, and with the understanding that transportation is such an issue for the largest regional school district in the state, in terms of getting kids in and out of schools safely, we made a decision to suggest to school committee that they support a full remote model for at least the opening of school, and then we will be diligent about assessing where we are. What that also does is that it will give us the opportunity to look at each one of our buildings. Again, we've looked at them closely. We have, HVAC systems that work. We have some places that have some machinery or, some of the mechanical items, as they always are. They need to be updated or fixed. Belts might be broken, but filters, as they always are changed through the maintenance plan. So, again, we'll be looking at that. If you had the opportunity to look at the document that was also shared, that's being shared right now with Business and Finance. So, and that's why this, again, all of this information came out a little late, and I apologize for that, but we have been kind of multitasking in terms of looking at some of the requests that have put out there by school committee around, what are the costs associated with these things? So, we've been spending time on that, define that, and, again, that helped to, I think, also move the needle toward remote for the time being. When we're looking at the spaces, again, these are things that we're going to have to talk about, because no matter what, even if we start off remote, I still want to have the ability to move into a hybrid model, and then ultimately a full in-person model once some of the constraints and restrictions are removed from what we can do around bringing kids back and forth to school on our buses, or social distancing and so forth. So, in the meantime, I think one of the things that we'll want to do as a subcommittee is really focus on, the preparation associated with the nursing stations, the preparation associated with signage, all the things associated with bathrooms, making sure, ensuring that there are, not all of our urinals have, in our bathrooms have dividers in between urinals. So some of our schools don't have a lot of restrooms to begin with. So, we're in the process of, actually installing those into schools. So, again, those are the things that I feel this committee should really be looking at ultimately with administration as we kind of go forward. And again, Dan is doing Business and Finance right now, which is why he's not over here with me doing this meeting.
Okay. I'll open it up to any questions anybody has. Realize we're kind of limited because we're looking at remote, but as we're looking at it, for actually, if if nobody minds, I do have a question. So looking at this plan right now, it's no students going back into the schools at all, correct?
Immediately, correct. But again, the goal would be, and this is, we're still basically 5 weeks from the opening of school. So if there was a way for us to get our highest needs students into school on a regular basis, that would be our goal. So working with our teachers union, working with our administration in the buildings where this could take place, our transportation providers, our goal would be to get those kids into in-person learning, if possible, and if it's safe. So we again, as we kind of look at this, I don't think anyone 5 weeks ago would have thought that, many school districts in the state of Massachusetts would have said, oh, we're thinking remote. I think 5 weeks ago, people were thinking, oh, geez, this is, it's hybrid or full in person. Because of the uptick in cases, I think because of the rise nationally and now locally in New England, this will affect how many districts open up. And the other option is there's going to be some fluidity associated with those types, the planning that occurs. So our goal would be to get those kids into a classroom setting, at least for some part of the day on a very regular basis, as soon as humanly possible. We just have to look at, ensuring that however we do it, it's done safely and it's done in a way that, allows for staff and students to be able to go in and out of schools in a way that, again, doesn't affect their health. For example, I know I just read this a little earlier, a school in Georgia, they literally opened up and within a day they had to close at least one of their classrooms because a student had COVID. I'm sure there are many more that aren't necessarily reporting out nationally, but those are the things that we're going to have to look at again moving forward. So the goal would be to get our highest needs students, Adam, into some type of in-person learning as soon as possible.
Okay. So what, I guess from this subcommittee's viewpoint, what are the facility hurdles that you need to overcome at this point to start considering that?
So again, it's, I think when we look at this, for some of our special populations, it's a little different because of students, some of these students' inability to wear a mask, what type of PPE protection we need to provide for staff, what type of specific protocols will be in place for kids transferring from, let's just say a van into the school, into a space, and making sure that is the one learning space is being utilized. So we have a pretty solid idea of how all of that would play out and would work out in a school setting. Now it's just literally a matter of fine tuning it by program, and ultimately it will be by individual student. And Christine Smith, the administrator of special education, and I talked about that a little earlier today, just in reference to not necessarily generically saying, okay, this is a group of kids who are in a particular program and all these kids are going no matter what. It's still going to be dependent upon, really whether or not parents want to say, you know what, we'd rather have services done remotely, versus in person. But, again, we want to get those kids in there. So in terms of facility items, the facility items are, ensuring that, one of the things we found, we have students that have cubbies. Our cubbies, some of them are made out of former, if you're familiar with an office, an office divider that, you could put a pin into, so almost like a place where you could post things and so forth. So anything that has cloth on it like that, we can't use. So we have to look at either putting acrylic over them or moving them into ones that are wooden. or plastic that don't have a surface where these germs could live for up to 72 hours. So we're that's kind of the place at which we're at right now. But it's in terms of the protocols and so forth, I feel like we're in a really good place with that.
I'll open it up to anybody else.
Yeah, a couple things. I was looking at the air filtration, air handler, HVAC systems, and on the FAQ that was prepared from our meeting last week, or was it Monday? I don't even remember. I'm sorry. Was it Monday? I don't remember. Anyway, we had a meeting and there was a FAQ created from this. And in that, the question about HVAC and filtration was, it was basically, okay, we have filters, we swap them out, that's part of our regular maintenance, and that's how it's presented in there. However, in the plan that was submitted to the state, I guess it was at the end of July, maybe the 31st, in there, when you were documenting the expenditures or projected issues for a fully in-person model, in there, the same question looks a little more dim. There was a talk of expense of having to make repairs and have to make some replacements, and so it could be that technically those answers are both correct. But I just kind of want to get a sense of, what are we really looking at? And I know you're probably going to say it varies building to building, but I'd really like to have an understanding of what is the need for the HVAC air circulation systems with our district, because while it's really nice outside and open windows are lovely, if we are going to move to a hybrid model later this year, we're not going to be able to lean exclusively on open windows. So I'd like to know where that is and what sort of a financial roadblock that could be.
Sure. So I think I mentioned this the other day, Jeff, when we talked about the the utilization of room air purifiers
Okay.
in lieu of because again, so as it's interesting because as new information comes out, as DESI shares things or CDC shares items, doctors put more information out there. The whole concept of putting a room air purifier into a classroom that turns the air over 3 times an hour, completely turns it over, is considered to be as good as kind of a fresh air intake, especially since kids will be wearing masks. So that's a pretty inexpensive way of dealing with any univents that don't or fresh air intake univents that might not be working. That's always our concern, looking at whether or not we have systems that are going to be able to move, circulate the air. There are some systems, and I'm just trying to think. I talked to Jimmy Cavello about this Tuesday or Monday. We have, I know Paxton Center School has some issues with their pneumatic system, and part of that is due to leaks in the hosing, the hoses that actually move the air through the system in order to have the vents run correctly and adjust the thermostats and so forth. And Central Tree is also in a very similar situation. So one of the things we're looking at is, okay, what would the overall cost be to fix something like that, go in and replace the piping in the walls and so forth, so that it would be a system that would be similar to, let's just say, Mount View, that's a brand new building. Those are costs that are going to be pretty darn high. A kind of an inexpensive way around this is to look at the $150, $200 air purifier system for classrooms that we would put in place, until those items could be fixed. But again, that's that's newer information that we just got earlier this week.
Okay, but even still, and that certainly does sound like a more affordable route, but even still, $150 multiplied by
Right.
X number of classrooms.
Right. It's still going to add up. It's still going to be thousands upon thousands of dollars. None of these items will be cheap. For example, the cost associated with probably completely fixing, the Paxton pneumatic system, it would probably be in the $30,000 to $50,000 range. And again, that's a complete fix. That would be replacing all the tubing and so forth. I don't think it was done correctly when the entire school was renovated or partially renovated about 25 years ago, 26 years ago now. So again, that's a system that's slowly been failing. We have our high school that has, renovated. It's, I think, 15 years ago now. And we have some of those systems, as people deal with in their own homes, that start to fail after 10, 12, 13, 15, 20 years. So, we're starting to see some of our HVAC systems, some of our air handling units malfunction. And again, those are ongoing systems that we deal with. And we have our HVAC people right now scheduled to take care of the buildings that require the most support, kind of in order. And, we're also looking at hiring outside vendors to help fix the items such as, what I mentioned in Paxton and, possibly also looking at Central Tree.
All right, thanks.
So with those kinds of repairs and things, how does that work for the town agreements? Because I would think that if it's going in that $30,000 to $50,000 range, we go that, or if we go with the air purifiers for the classroom, I guess where does that fall in with having to work with the towns for the other schools besides the high school?
So in terms of the overall amount, so we have a $35,000 threshold that, everything under $35,000 is our responsibility. Everything over $35,000 is the responsibility of the town. As we look at the town of Paxton, one of the things that we will do is start to have conversations with, and we, again, I've mentioned this to the town manager, a couple of years ago. One of the things that we'll start to do is talk about what, here's an opportunity for us to kind of work jointly to fix this. It'll go back to the town. If it's something that, again, we want to be able to work with them. So, I'm hoping that this could be something that they might be able to tap into some of their COVID money to help support, because it could help. It could possibly cover some of those funds. And Paxton was receptive when Director Dede reached out to the 5 communities around accessing some of the COVID municipality money. Paxton was actually receptive. So I think that might be an option for us. In terms of the high school's a little more challenging because, again, it's all 5 towns. We would need to go back to them and do it through a town meeting, where in the same way that we did, where we requested money above and beyond the budget for the field, and that didn't pass 2 years ago now, I believe. The same thing would happen where we would say, okay, it couldn't happen now, but maybe next spring when we're pulling the budget together, and we maybe have to say, okay, we have 15 units on the roof. I mean, there are I think 50 to 60 units on the top of the high school, but let's just say 15 of them really need to be replaced. We would quantify that, and we could bring that back to the towns.
So then, following up on that, for the high school in particular, how ready is that HVAC system for reopening? If we would have to delay repair, upgrade, or whatever to make it work for COVID times, would it be workable ahead of a spring meeting of the 5 towns?
It'd be workable in the sense that we would probably be utilizing the air purifiers, as I said earlier. So that would act as air exchanges in terms of probably some of the rooms. Again, that building is 375,000 square feet. So, items, univents sometimes work, sometimes don't work. They fix them. They move on to something else. So it would probably be something where we buy a number of the air purifying units for each classroom and have them in place for any space that didn't have the air circulation.
I'm sure you don't have the exact numbers now, or have we looked at, like, rough cost wise what it would be for the high school? I mean, there's big round numbers.
So what's tough is the challenging part for us is that we typically don't go out to the private sector to have an outside vendor fix our machinery unless it's an issue that really requires more than what our own people can do. So for the most part, we just buy parts. And again, I don't know the specific prices around the parts and so forth. But, we could look, that's one of the things that we will be doing over the next few weeks is assessing how much needs to be fixed and quantifying what those costs might be. So some of it involves hiring plumbers. Some of it involves hiring HVAC companies to come in. Again, Craig, who works for us, owned Quabbin Controls, and he was the company that provided all of the service to this district prior to the district hiring him, probably, 9 or 10 years ago now, so that he works exclusively for us.
Okay. Anything else, Linda?
I think I do. Oh, actually, I don't know if this is, I was a little bit confused about where PPE costs were getting talked about, if that is within our domain or if that, I was just thinking with looking at the face mask policy, that was for us, correct?
Yeah.
So just wondering about that because I was looking in the plans and I was wondering if my math was off. But looking at the estimate that for hybrid, half of the PPE would be required to purchase versus in person, and I didn't quite understand how that would work when the teachers would still be. I guess my question is, who is the PPE being purchased for? And if it's for the teachers, they will be in school 4 days to 5 days a week under hybrid, wouldn't they? And so that's where I didn't understand the half. If that's outside of this subcommittee, so be it. But
no, I mean, I think it's definitely within our realm to at least question it. And I mean, it goes back and forth between us and business and finance. Like they're in the real money side of it, but I mean, definitely looking at quantities, how it's implemented, things like that. That's absolutely.
okay, then that is my question: is who is this PPE being purchased for? Because if it's anyone other than the students, then half doesn't make sense for hybrid, unless I'm way just thinking in La La Land, which
so
definitely possible.
No. So what the state asked us to do was really lay out 3 months worth of PPE planning for staff, for in case students might need it. The nitrate gloves, gowns, face shields for those who require them. So that's where those numbers come into play. When we're looking at teachers using masks just in general, they're going to have to replace those on a regular basis. That's not something that you. And again, what we're finding is that, and you're probably finding this as well, depending upon the company from which you purchase these masks, they specifically typically the rubber bands that go back around your ears can snap pretty easily. So the quality of some of this PPE has not been fantastic. And I think that's been everywhere because there's just been such a rush to produce it. So I believe that's where that number came forward.
Thanks, but actually my question is a little different. Is it, well, actually, no, sorry. I just found that whole calculus really confusing because if you're buying for the same, if it's going to be the teachers are going to be in the school, what, one day less than on the hybrid versus the in-person model. So I still don't understand why it would be half.
Why there would be half for the hybrid versus the in-person?
Yeah, why would there be half purchased? You're still having to supply it for the.
I see. So, you know what, I think some of that might also have been, so when, we were looking at that and Dan was quantifying this, I think he was also thinking the in-person with the number of students in the buildings as well. So you're right, there were probably not, when we're looking at this, it's probably the number of kids as well. There are times when, teachers might be remote versus in person and so forth. And, he may have utilized that in his calculation as well.
Okay, I think that whenever we make the calculus of moving into hybrid, that should be
Clarified.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense because, again, I don't want to overestimate, yet at the same time, we really don't want to underestimate.
Right. I mean, I understand being fiscally responsible here. Absolutely. On the other hand, when it comes to safety, I think we want to really make sure we're covered. We're doing right by our people.
We have everything we need, correct?
Okay.
If I may,
Yeah,
Adam, I don't know if you're about to start another question. Just one more question about the different spaces, just because I didn't see it on the report, and I don't necessarily need a detailed answer at this stage, since no students would be going on, assuming we end up with remote and it's no students at the beginning, but the spaces that are not traditional classroom spaces, just things like the rooms that SLPs use or OT or those other services and those kinds of considerations. I just wanted to think about see what was happening with the since those spaces often are kind of smaller, maybe won't have a window, and those kinds of considerations. I just wanted to highlight because it seems like they're at higher contact levels, and so that's why I just wanted to make sure that it gets called out.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that Bob and Christine have looked at in the buildings themselves have been, and you're exactly right, sometimes where the related services are offered, specifically speech or occupational therapy or physical therapy. Those spaces are typically smaller than a traditional classroom, or even a special education resource room, which could be a quarter to half the size of a regular classroom. So, we're looking at whether or not those spaces can even be utilized, or if they are being utilized, what's the air circulation like? Do we need to put an air purifier in those rooms? And we limit the number of people in that space. So, for example, a speech and language room might typically have, in one of our larger schools where we might have a specialized programs, we might have a full-time speech and language therapists and then 2 speech assistants, and they all work within the same space. And sometimes they might have kids come down and work with them in groups, and they could have multiple groups going on at the same time. Those are things that we're looking at in terms of the spaces themselves. So if it's in a classroom-like space that has air circulation and windows, as long as the social distancing can occur appropriately, those spaces are fine. Smaller spaces, though, that are typically more for one-to-one services, those are ones that we have to look at more closely, because again, if we're not able to have the air circulation, if we're not able to have the social distancing, those are going to have to be spaces that aren't used. And again, when we looked at, if you looked at, some of the models, or one of the models that was put together, it was really looking at some of those spaces and really not tapping into every single space we have in our schools, but really looking at how we could, if we had to, what we would need for portable classroom space to help support some of these other learning opportunities.
If I can, I'd like to, one other thought that's come up as we've talked about this. I would like to know, assuming we went to the hybrid model, assuming we got into that, are the classrooms that we have across the district, are the classrooms such that in a hybrid model of half and half, that there would be at least 6 feet between the desks? Do we have enough space to accommodate that 6-foot spacing?
No, we don't.
Okay, so that I appreciate that. Thank you, because I kind of had a feeling it was going to be like that. We know that from the state recommendations for the buses, the state is basically saying that buses should run around 30%, give or take, depending on the bus, but it's around 30%. I'm wondering what we would gain from a facility standpoint in terms of space and elbow room and distancing room. I'm wondering what we would gain if we were to look at a hybrid model that was thirds instead of halves.
So that's a discussion that we have had. I think some districts, and again, all of the models are coming out, between now and early next week around, planned reopenings. So some districts have looked at quarter times. So actually only a quarter of the students would come into schools during a hybrid model, which to me doesn't necessarily feel like a hybrid model. The other one I haven't seen thirds, Jeff, but that could be a way of looking at this, because again, it would kind of deal with the opportunity for us to allow for more capacity around transportation, and could get the kids into the building a little bit more. The one on, one off, or 2 days on, Monday, Tuesday, and then a Thursday, Friday model, with Wednesday being fully remote, is really the preferred model because of the consistency associated with getting kids into the classroom, having them there. Definitely something that we could look at. There's nothing that ties our hands around defining, okay, it has to be this particular model right now. The only thing that we have to look at, and that's what we're talking about this evening later on at the school committee meeting, is really, okay, school committee making a decision to say, you know what, we're going to, follow the recommendations of the administration and move toward a remote model to start the school year.
No, I thank you, and I understand that, and I'm not trying to throw a curveball at all. I just what I'm looking at is everyone's laughing. Like I throw curveballs.
That's a good curveball.
All right, I do throw curveballs. I admit, I confess, you caught me. But my thought is this: I'm looking at it strictly from a gains point of view. I mean, the idea of the hybrid is the idea to get the kids in school, but under circumstances that are safe. And we're losing that if under our own hybrid model, they're at school and they don't have that 6-foot spacing across the district in the classroom. That we're losing what the whole point of the hybrid is supposed to be if we can't achieve that. So that's why I was asking, from a facilities point of view, if we were to go down to a third, and you're right, obviously 2 days a week is better than what I'm suggesting. Of course it is. 5 days a week would be ideal. I'm simply just trying to make it in a way that is compatible with our facilities, our buildings, with what we got. Can we do the hybrid in a way that is as it's supposed to be, as safe as possible, with the maximum recommended distance? I don't believe in going minimum. The maximum recommended distance everywhere we are in the classroom. That's why I brought that up. I'm sorry for.
No, it's a good question. And actually, when you're looking at it, I do know that many school districts are ignoring the DESE kind of guidance around 3 feet, and communities are sticking with the 6-foot guidance because that's the guidance that is out there for everything else. So why should schools be any different?
Right. I have a couple of questions on timeline. So, based on the recommendation that we're going to remote learning to start the school year, what are we looking at for who is in the building? From today through the end of the first quarter. Who's in there? What accommodations do we need to make now for that? Are we prepared for that?
So that's exactly what we're doing now. So whether or not it's administrative staff, custodial staff, we also have our cafeteria staff. So even if we're remote, we're going to have to run at least in at least 4 towns some cafeteria type program in order to provide lunches to our students through free and reduced lunch in the same way that we did last spring. So those are things that we're currently putting together, as well as if we are able to get students back into specific spaces, and typically those students would be kids who would be in our district-wide programs. We would be looking at those specific spaces, which we already are doing, and ensuring that all of the social distancing, all of the materials, everything is safe and ready to go for them if we're able to get them back into school sooner.
Okay. Following up on that, for students that are in district-wide programs, are we also at least opening it up enough to look at, at least partial or full year moving it, if it makes sense, from, one school to another school where they may be able to better accommodate?
That's a good question, Adam. I've not actually thought of that because our programs, so let's just say, for example, the ABA programs, all of the materials there, the spaces there, we have those spaces established in those buildings because they're the best possible spaces for our students. Typically, those spaces are also air conditioned because we will have our kids there during the summer. And many of these kids need cooler air anyway to begin with. So, we probably wouldn't look at that unless there was a way for us to maybe merge some of the spaces so we had less movement in some of our schools.
Okay. And then again on timelines. So, we talked about the HVAC. What other major facility type planning efforts do we foresee in the next couple months? And I guess what are those kind of points that we hit, those milestones where we got to look at it so that we can be ready for whatever comes next?
So I think, a couple people already brought it up, but the HVAC, the air quality, the systems, the filtration systems, all of those items are the kind of the number one items that we're focusing on in terms of spaces. Again, we are putting together, our bathroom so that they're, can be properly spaced. We're working on how we are, if we're in a hybrid model down the road, how lunches would work. Again, lunches become a major issue because of the distancing And because, if we're talking about half of our school's desks and so forth being moved out of a classroom, they have to be stored in different places. And a lot of places they're being stored in part of the cafeteria or part of the gymnasium. So those are all things that we would be looking at in terms of milestones that we would want to be paying attention to. We'd want to pay attention to where we are when we think we're going to be going back. Things are trending downward. We're starting to see, everything looks like we can open back up. Maybe it's phase 3 to 4 at the governor's level, at the state level. Well, I think that would, prior to that, we'd want to ensure that we have all of our air systems ready to go in classrooms. And if we don't, then we would have the air purifiers in all of those spaces as well. And, really defining, I think Linda mentioned this earlier, really defining, okay, these are spaces that we're not going to be using for learning spaces at all, because, there are no windows. There's no access to any air circulation. It's one door in, one door out. There's no egress. So you can't even open up a door to get air movement. So those are the spaces that we're looking at.
Okay. Okay. I think that's about it for questions. Go ahead.
I have a couple more in terms of internet and then security. So first is actually I think easier to talk about might be security. Maybe I'm wrong. But basically in terms of if we're going remote, then fire drills, Alice training, those kinds of get put on the back burner. But if we are moving into hybrid, how those would be handled, because neither kind of drill works very well with social distancing. And then for internet, just bandwidth, what kind, if teachers are going to be streaming from the classroom, as was, that was on the task force document, I believe, about having teachers be in the classrooms. So would they be streaming out live? Would it just be recorded? Those kinds of questions of, can we handle it? Because I know at our last meeting, I believe it was said that we did not have the bandwidth to be streaming every classroom at once, but I don't know where the limitation is. So those, I think, are my final questions.
Yeah, so those are good questions. I can tell you, I've Chief Hall here in Holden and I are going to be meeting probably sometime next week to talk about the kind of expectations around fire evacuation, safety protocols, and so forth, especially when we're talking about social distancing. As you said, social distancing doesn't work in a fire drill. Social distancing doesn't work in an exercise for Alice. So those are things that if we are in a hybrid model where we do have some kids in school, we're going to have to work on that. We're also, no matter what, even with staff in schools, we will still have to have some type of fire drill per mass MGL. So we'll be working on that with all of our 5 fire departments and ultimately police departments. In terms of bandwidth, you're correct. If we were to have, I believe, 500 teachers streaming at the same time, Barry would tell me that we probably don't have the bandwidth that would allow that to happen perfectly. But I can tell you that when we have, and Barry has the capacity to see this on his computer, so this might be a good question that we ask of him. But when we have 2,000 students on Chromebooks up at the high school, not just the high school, but the entire district, Barry can actually gauge the amount of bandwidth that is being used, not only by building or by device, but by building, but also by the entire district. And typically we don't even come close when all 7,000 students are in the school and 1,100 employees. But again, how that kind of plays out in terms of video conferencing could be a very different situation. So that's a good question for Barry that I'll make sure to ask him.
Do you know if he'd be available at the meeting at 7?
He might be. I will check. I'm going to text him right now and see if he's going to be at the meeting. I'm not sure, Adam.
Okay. Yeah, just a heads up that if he's got his little sign in there, he's going to get asked a question, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. And actually, it's a good question to ask.
Yeah.
I might also throw in there if he's fielding that one. I might ask about if we go full remote, which it seems that's where we're leaning. Will schools be offered up as hotspots again? I know we don't have a lot of kids who don't have internet access, but I know some people are indicated that that's an issue for them. So would we make something like that available again, and how might we go about that?
Well, Jeff, not to throw you a curveball, but we are, with the grant, we were able to purchase 50 hotspots that we're going to be lending out to families this school year. So
Okay.
I'm hopeful that eliminates any students or families that don't have the capacity to access any remote learning that we put out there for them.
That is awesome. Thank you. I will take curves like that all day long.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then I also, Barry will be at the meeting tonight. So you are welcome to throw that out there to him later on.
Okay. All right. I don't necessarily want to cut this short, but I did want to touch on the face covering policy real quick before we have to stop in 8 minutes. Does anybody have an issue with that? Okay. Let me try to present. The screen.
Could I ask a question real quick just about facilities?
Sure.
Daryl, just speaking as a ABA teacher at the preschool, are there any discussions about getting sinks into the rooms for the 2 classrooms that don't currently have a sink?
I do know that Jim Cavello has been looking at whether or not that's even feasible. There are issues associated with plumbing and, that's an old building in terms of, running the pipes and so forth. But it is something that Jim is looking at. I'm not sure whether or not it can actually happen. If it can, we'll definitely look to see if we can do it.
Thank you.
Okay. So real quick, this policy came out from MASC this morning, and Megan Weeks sent it to me and asked me to just bring it up with the group. If it is something that we would like to implement as a policy, we need to keep in mind that it requires 2 full committee meetings before it becomes a policy. So if we do that, it would have to be at least 2 full meetings before people go back to school. So we do have a little bit of time, assuming we're going remote, which it looks like we are, but something we should not put on the back burner. I did take a look at it. I don't know if you guys had a chance to review it, but I had some issues with the policy as written, and I just highlighted these. So I thought I would just run through it real quick and then turn it over to you for a couple minutes and then go from there. So, I highlighted here that, if a student or actually anyone has a medical, behavioral, or other challenge making it unsafe to wear a face mask or covering, it says a written note from a physician is required. I do have a concern that may be not necessarily compliant with ADA. And, it's something that could be passed down, especially in the case of behavioral or maybe even medical, that, if there's an IEP team or a 504 group that, that group could make the decision, or it could be with the building principal and communications with the teachers and the nurse, which is also mentioned down here. So these kind of seem to conflict with each other. The other things that I just, on a quick read through, This says that we would have some disposable face coverings if people arrive on board a school bus without one. Not sure we necessarily want to say that, or if that's something, if we do make it a policy, we would have to flow it down to the bus company, or we provide each bus with it. Other things were just violations would be handled in the same manner as other violations of school committee policy. I don't know what that manner is. We have a policy on classroom size. I don't know how staff handles violations of that. And just other things. Usually in the policy, it says how violations would be handled instead of just, the same as another nebulous policy. And then this policy would remain in place until rescinded by the school committee. Just because, again, it would take 2 meetings of the full committee to be able to rescind it. It just made sense to me that, we make this policy in place if administration believes that this policy is needed. If administration decides face coverings are needed, this is the policy that applies. And then that would allow administration to also say that when they're not needed, this policy doesn't apply. So that was just some of my thoughts. I'll turn it over to you guys for the last 2 minutes.
I had highlighted a couple of the same things, but for different reasons, which I don't think that there's really time to go into those. So that's fine. I do think that we should take this up as a policy, or the school committee should. I think that, especially since last time we were talking about what do we do if a student refuses, not on medical grounds, but on whatever other grounds that they can't wear it, or staff. And so knowing that face masks make an enormous difference in being able to do anything face to face, I think that we should have a policy in place. I think that's, I had the same question about the rescinded by the school committee and the violations, how the same manner part. It just seems like we would have to do a bit more homework on that. So that's all. There's also one thing about like equity that I had, but that's another thing. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And if I can just jump in real quick, because I do need to use the restroom before I jump into this next meeting. But just to let you know, there will be other districts pulling this information together. We could share this with Naomi to have her take a look at it. She's our legal counsel as well. Adam, I agree that I have some concerns around whether or not that is legal to make a statement, as you mentioned earlier. And the other thing is, this information is a little contradictory to what Jeff Riley has told superintendents, whereby he said that if students refuse to wear a mask, we really don't have any recourse, because if we're not educating them, appropriately, then we're not providing a free and appropriate education. So again, I'm just going to sign off real quick because I want to jump over to the other meeting, everybody.
I'm talking into mute. Okay. I guess I just wanted to see, do we want to take this on and kind of fast track this? So I think the general consensus is yes. So we'll set up a meeting. Maybe middle of next week, if that works for you. If not, definitely the week after. And I can have Rebecca coordinate that, but I think ideally, even if it's just another hour-long meeting to look at this policy and do a first pass at it, figuring it might take us, at least one to get it how we like it, and then send it to our legal. So does that sound good? I'll have Rebecca send something out looking for middle of next week for a meeting.
Yeah, that'll work. Okay.
And based on time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I got to do a roll call vote. Linda?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Adam, yes. Okay, I will see you all over in the other meeting.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Nice to meet
Carol.
you, Carol.
Bye.